All right. Well, thank you very much. And I'm going to share my screen if that's okay. So, teach from your best self is what we're talking about tonight. And this is something that Margaret and I have been working on for quite some time. Let's see the best way to do this. So, in terms of just organizing our time together, we're going to talk for a while and then we're going to open this up to questions. But first, I just want to give some background on Teach From Your Best Self, kind of what it is, how it fits into the current realities in education. And then we're going to look at some research because we've been doing some research in terms of what is this leading to in terms of the experience of educators, which Margaret's going to talk about that. And then open it up. Questions, discussion, anything you want to know, also suggestions that you might have for us. So a little bit about me. I started teaching in public school in 1999. English teacher. I taught in both mainstream and public education for 24 years. I entered the profession with the diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome. And this actually is a hugely important component in the development of Teach From Your Best Self because I wasn't the kind of educator who could just drink more coffee and power through. I would utterly crash. And what I realized early on was the job was is so challenging that I had to figure out a different way of doing it. Right out of college, chronic fatigue syndrome flattened me to the point to where I was in bed like all day for months at a time. By the time I decided I could go back and get my master's in education, I had recovered to a degree, but it wasn't like able to really do the job in the way that it was expected. So I had to figure some new things out. I had some advantages. One of them, excellent mentor, and one of the things he suggested to me was a karate path. So between input from my mentor, what I was actually learning in the dojo in martial arts, and then my experience as an educator, I was able to put things together from some new perspectives. And then since 2021, which is when we led the first Teach From Your Best Self program, working in partnership with Southern Oregon Regional Educator Network, who I am now employed by, the Oregon Writing Project at SOU. Margaret and I have been leading these professional learning experiences that have actually proved transformational for educators. And by transformational, I mean they tell us that it's transformed them, but they also tell us things like, if it wasn't for Teach Me Your Best Self, I would have left teaching. So at a nuts and bolts level, the original model of the program is a year-long learning experience where we take the educators for 1 week in the summer. And during that 1 week, we kind of lay out all of the material, all of the tools, all of the approaches. And then we do follow-ups every month throughout the school year. And those are for integration. I don't know about y'all, but I've sat in a lot of professional learning experiences, some of them good, and I think I'm going to use it. But then when I meet the reality back at my job on Monday, it can tend to fly out the window because my brain will tend to just do what's familiar. And so with these integration sessions, we help educators build new habits and patterns that allow them to apply what they've learned over the summer. After the first year, people immediately wanted more. And so this more has become what we call the leadership strand of Teach From Your Best Self. And it uses a model that I developed called yes-based leadership. So, so people are becoming leaders in a way that's aligned with their personal yes, or what inspires them, what their own passion is. And they work together on projects, one of them being research, which is what Margaret's going to talk about. And this year, we're also bringing Teach From Your Best Self to all of the teacher preparation candidates in their master's degree program at Southern Oregon University. And starting 2025, 2026, we're going to start a cohort of Lead From Your Best Self for people who are education administrators. From a kind of hands-on heart and mind level, Teach From Your Best Self is really a mindset shift. an education that prioritizes the being that we bring over all the things we do. And that's actually a massive paradigm shift in education because it's all about trying to get all the stuff done, but that effort will pull us out of our best self. And next thing you know, we're just kind of frazzled people trying to get everything done, which turns out is not very good for kids, and it's definitely not good for us as educators, especially when we're thinking about burnout. So we offer a set of practical approaches that do three things. One, give educators more access to their best selves under the pressures of teaching. Two, give educators approaches for creating learning environments that bring out the best in students and adults alike. And three, give educators approaches for interacting with students that activate the best in students. And one way to think about best self too is I'm in my whole learning brain, right? When we get under stress and pressure, we often lose cognitive capabilities, we lose access to our tools, our resources, and we can very easily slip into our survival brains. And that's not a place to teach from, and it's definitely not a place we can learn from effectively. This idea of best self, um, a lot of times we think of it in terms of it's circumstantial, right? Like, so if good things happen, I'm going to feel good. I'm going to be happy. I'll be in this best self place. If bad things happen or things that I don't prefer, it can throw me into a version of myself that's upset, cranky, impatient. What we're suggesting here is that there is a best self accessible no matter what we're facing. So even if things are happening that aren't too great, even if I'm under a lot of pressure and stress at my job, I can still be in my best self. It's not necessarily going, it doesn't have to be tied to external circumstances. So, in one way, thinking about best self, it's easy to think, oh, I'm going to be always calm, composed, always have it together, and not necessarily. It simply means I have access to my whole brain, I have an open heart, and I can respond to situations rather than react. So I came back to work after my mom died. I was back at work after watching her die within a couple days. And there is a best self version of me that's grieving. There's a best self version of me, even that's appropriately angry about a situation. There's a best self version of me that is having chronic fatigue, internal body crashing into a meltdown, and I can go teach from that place um, because because the self that I bring doesn't necessarily have to be attached to physical circumstances. Though I will still be grieving and I will still feel maybe exhausted, or I still may feel the feelings I'm feeling, I can keep that responsive, open mind, open heart in the face of it. So all of the parts of teaching my best self can fit into this model. If I'm in my best self, no matter what's happening, that's going to tend to bring out the best in my students. It's also going to tend to positively impact the learning environment. If I'm interacting with students to bring out their best self, that actually makes my job easier because now I'm not dealing with students nearly as resistant. And that's going to also impact the learning environment. If I pay attention to the learning environment and try to create like a class culture or vibe that tends to bring out the best in me and my students alike, that helps the students, it helps me. So this feedback loop is very powerful. And I think a lot of times in education, we get the inverse, right? Students come kind of in not in their learning brain maybe, and that can throw the teacher out of their best self. That can make the learning environment chaotic. I mean, this feedback loop can work either direction. But the most important part is if I can hold the line and stay in my best self, just because of mirror neurons, it's going to tend to maximize the chances that students are going to be in their best selves. Plus, I'm going to be able to relate to them from all my teacher's tools in ways that bring out their best. So then where we could go from there, and this is exciting to me, is creating district policies, practices, and cultures that bring out the best of every adult and every student in the building or in the district. And then, so you've got these policies that are bringing out the best in students, that are bringing out the best in school staff. And then inside of that is what's going on in the classroom. So what this really, everything that works from student to, from staff to student works at a larger scale from administration to staff. We just can blow up the feedback loop. And I'm excited about that because I think really that's what we need to do to shift education. There's a lot of challenges to bringing our best. My gosh, one of the main ones is too much to do. Every single educator I talk to, in my own experience for doing this job for 24 years, never caught up. And because teachers have such a heart and want to do the best they can, it drives them to work after hours. It drives them to work over the summer, drives them to work in the evenings. It drives them to work on the weekends. Obviously, large classes filled with diverse needs, ability levels. Students come many times impacted by trauma, social pathologies. There's been a surge of mental health issues and also big disruptive behaviors, especially after the pandemic. Something about being at home for 2 years has led to just off the scale jump in big behaviors amongst especially our youngest kids. We've got educators facing lack of respect and lack of appreciation. Cell phones are an issue. The job can be isolating, not to mention stressors like lower pay. So these are some of the challenges that we're facing that educators have to face to bring their best selves to. And what we're finding is that educators can, though ultimately we need a whole new model for a more sustainable profession. A 2022 Gallup poll found that K-12 educators, and this is anyone who works in K-12, including the front office secretary and the bus drivers, to be the most burned out employees in America. Any ideas about what second most burned out was? Anyone want to wager a guess? And I can't see you all right now, so feel free just to yell it out.
Nurses.
I would have been my guess too, Robin, but it's not. Anyone else want to guess one?
Lawyers.
Nope. It is y'all. It's people working in universities, college education. It's graduate and undergraduate faculty. So we're really in this together. When educators struggle, it's really actually not just the educators that suffer, but it's bad for students as well. There's a lot of research now, increasingly more and more, that's showing that burned out teachers leads to reduced quality of instruction, lower student engagement, lower student motivation, higher student stress levels because that stress trickles down. And then teachers feel stressed to get kids to produce. So what do? They start putting pressure on the kids. Our stress brains are contagious. Part of the reason, of course, is mirror neurons. But guess what? When I'm in my learning brain, that's contagious too. So if I'm an educator, and even though the situation may be stressful, if I can keep that learning brain, it's going to tend to have students' brains fire in mimicry of mine. One question that I've asked myself is like, well, gee, how did we get to an education system in which it's the most burned out group of employees in the entire country? And I've got a theory. Love to hear your thoughts about it. Organizations are always run by hidden narratives, like subconscious beliefs or stories that kind of run that under the scenes. And one important narrative that I believe is underlying education is students learn based on what teachers do. If I believe that, if students aren't learning as much as I want them to, then the solution is to give teachers more and different things to do. And then also put in processes of accountability to make sure that the teachers are doing what we want them to do. And in the process of doing that, I'm not only burning out teachers, but I'm removing agency from teachers, and I'm kind of taking the joy right out of the job. Teachers experience this as micromanagement. And this narrative works in conjunction with the best way to get people to do what we want them to is through applying pressure. If I can apply enough pressure, I can get you to do something. That, of course, just pushes people into their survival brain and makes them hate, if they're students, hate school. Oops. So I'm gonna pause before Margaret takes the reins and talks about some of the research. And I'm just gonna stop share here for a second, just to check in with everybody, because I know I said a whole bunch of stuff. Questions, anything you'd like some clarity on, curiosities?
Yeah, I was one of my, I guess, curiosities that is going on, and we don't have to address it now, but is around the 1 week that you get with the teachers. And I'm curious as to what kind of like transformational activities or sessions or I guess I'm curious about what that 1 week like looks like. Um, yeah, yeah,
Yes, that's a big question, of course, because they get the whole package during that week. But I will say that we start with a circle, and it's very, very rare that educators feel safe enough to share in a circle with other educators about what it's actually like for them to teach. And so I think the circles have a big role in creating the community. The community that gets created becomes very tight and very close really quickly. Um, People start to realize they're not alone in terms of the challenges and the stresses that they're experiencing. And then they start to see, oh, there's choices that I can make that I didn't know I could make. Like I have choices in terms of my own state of being that I didn't know were available to make. And that starts to give educators uh, start to get inspired by their own agency in places that they didn't know they had choices, if that makes sense. The reason I showed you that triangle is because all of the principles, they're principles, they're approaches, they're every situation is different, right? And every educator has their own unique style that works. But you can apply a teach for my best self principle while I'm teaching in a way that will help me stay in my best self, even if I have a student who's screaming at me, right? So there's things I can do. There's also things that how I can relate to a student that's either going to make the situation worse or that's going to potentially maximizes the chances that it's going to get better. There's things that I can do by paying attention to the whole learning space that tends to make sure that all the rest of the students aren't flipping their lid because you've got this one student making this outburst. And so all of the approaches and principles are ways of doing one of those three things. And that's what we focus on during the week. The other thing we do is we as an Oregon writing project course, we also integrate quite a bit of writing, both reflective and expressive writing. Now, expressive writing is something that we can go in and start to heal some of the previous traumatic experiences from our life, because that's what makes me susceptible to getting triggered. One of these distinctions is called hurt spots, and places where I might be carrying some trauma from a difficult experience, and then some current situation happens that awakens that in me. And now I'm filled with all of those feelings, and I'm going to act, number one, act way out of proportion to the situation. Number two, I'm going to tend to blame the person who is triggering the trauma in me. And this creates all kinds of problems in terms of relationships, all kinds of problems in education. So just even identifying that we have hurt spots, identifying what they are, how they feel, and the fact that I can go in and write about previous traumatic experiences in a way where I start to change the narrative, change the story that's driving those, because it's not the pain I'm still experiencing from that thing that happened when I was 5. It's the story that 5-year-old made up about myself that I'm trying to fight from and I'm trying to avoid. And now this situation has almost imposed that story onto me, and it's so toxic to me that I have to feel like I've got to fight you to keep it away. Does that make sense? There's a lot.
yeah,
There's a lot
absolutely.
that
And
we
that,
put into this week, but
mm,
But it comes out the other side, and people have whole new tools to make choices that they wouldn't have made before. And those choices create new realities in their classrooms, new realities with their spouses, new realities with their kids. They People always tell me, my gosh, I thought this was just going to help me be a teacher, but I'm a better parent. I'm a better spouse now. I said, yeah, that's built in, but no, we didn't tell you because we were just wanted to support you with education. But because it's a transformational, it transforms all the areas of their life. Thanks for asking.
A great question. That was one of my questions too, Cam. When you started to design the original 1 week intensive, because I think that, from what I'm hearing, is the heart of really having an extended amount of time with teachers and building community with them, it's huge.
Yeah.
Well, I happen to know there's other transformational teacher workshops out there, such as the Fetzer Institute used to have the Courage to Teach program. Did you draw from any of those existing programs to help you design what you're doing?
No, I didn't. And part of the reason is because in my 24 years of education, I had never experienced what I knew that what I felt like I needed. And so I didn't have any transformational education experiences to draw from. I mean, I had some good books that I liked. I really loved Parker Palmer's Courage to Teach, really kind of became really,
The one
yeah,
I just referenced relates to
yeah.
it.
I was wondering because I read when I was in my teacher preparation program, I read that book. And I said, okay, this is kind of helping me create like a compass, like a true north for myself about who I am. But what it didn't help me do is how to maintain it in the face of the pressure and stress.
Mm.
Like I could have this idea, I want to do this, and I could do it as long as you weren't challenging me by activating hurt spots or I was feeling overwhelmed by all that there was to do. Does that make sense? Because then I revert, and that's when I start to become reactive. That I learned in the karate dojo because I had to learn how to stay calm and centered in the face of people charging at me with punches and kicks, which I realized, oh my gosh, that's a lot like teaching, except for the punches and kicks are, they're not actual punches and kicks, but there are a lot of demands on me that would help me, that would lead me to be dysregulated. It's like a threat.
So since you're using that reference, can I ask if you do embodied learning activities in your especially in the 1 week intensive, but also in the 1 month follow-ups?
Yeah, yeah, we do things. We physicalize it as much as I'm able to. There's quite a bit of physical doing activities that can kind of help embody the experience that we face the in the profession, and then we learn how to do things, making different choices and embody those different choices inside of the intensive. Great
Robin, it
question.
might help, and actually to address Cam's question earlier as well. I mean, examples of some of those things that range everything from breathing, mindful, grounded breathing, to some. Jay has a really wonderful activity with a whole bunch of beanbags come flying at you, and it simulates the feeling that you have when you've got a whole bunch of things or people coming at you, and being able to focus on just one of them, right? So actually embodying that practice. So lots of those kinds of things do come into play during that week, and then also during the follow-ups.
They learn some karate as well.
Yeah.
Some deflecting, stuff that's coming at us. How do I not let it hit me in a way that I'm going to take it to heart, but I can just kind of take the information and then deflect all of the content that I might otherwise take personal, and then move forward for my best self from those moments. There's quite a few. I try to build in as much as possible because your question, Robin, tells me a lot about who you are as a facilitator, because that's where the power is really is in the experience.
Could I jump in? Hi, everybody.
Hi, Paul.
Jay and Margaret, it's so nice to meet you. So I just have to introduce myself. So I am one of the editors of the Holistic Ed Review, and we were so delighted to be able to publish your recent article and all that you were able to share about your program and the research and so on. So thank you very much. And Robin, it's so good to see you. And Young-hee, I'm so glad to know you're in the room. Cam and Andrea, nice to see you as well, always. The other hat I wear, is I'm the founding head of an independent school. I'm focused on holistic pedagogy. And so get to work with a lot of my teachers and develop their capacity to find and teach from their best selves, that we haven't used that term exactly. Love the questions you've had so far and your answers for them. I have one paradox, nuance that I think about from time to time, related to something you bring up in your article, and you've mentioned a couple times so far today, Jay, which is agency.
Mhm.
And in particular, I hear and believe that we deprive educators of accessing a sense of autonomy, agency, creativity, that I can control how I feel, what I do, how I communicate, in that we hand them teacher-proofed curriculums. I love that phrase. And the scripted kinds of lessons and the high stakes tests and so on and so on and so on. And so at my school, one of the things that I think of as a tremendous gift I offer my teachers is, you get to decide, you get to create. The only question I want you to engage with is, what are these children needing?
Mhm.
And then you decide what the curriculum is, what the room should look like, the pace, the configuration, and whether this is a whole group, small group activity, and so on and so on. And the irony or paradox I find sometimes is that that gift is a source of tremendous stress and overwhelm for my teachers.
Yeah.
And I just think about, I don't know, just the complexity of that seemingly simple gesture of hey, you get to decide, you're in charge of your life, your classroom, you get to decide your feelings. I think especially as teachers are making that transition from a life, a society, and certainly a profession that separates them from their own agency, feelings, and proclivities and authority, it's scary and overwhelming sometimes.
Mhm.
And sometimes a teacher's best self is, I've found for my teachers, crafted from my leadership in my ability to really listen to and hear where my teachers are at, and sometimes what an individual teacher will need to be their best self is for me to tell them what to do. And I hate it. That's not what I think leadership should be, and ultimately not where we're going. But I think there's just a little more subtlety and nuance there,
I would
I
agree.
really love that you're talking about this, Paul, because I think it's super, super important. And when we tried to, coming to around a definition of agency, I think it's really important to stay away from this sort of free for all, wide open, and, whatever you want, because individuals don't operate in that kind of space. We operate within and around institutions, right? I really like, Anthony Giddens was a sociologist that I really like. Giddens's theory of agency was that it's not just about the individual or about the institution, but we're in this reciprocal relationship, right? And that the individual has potential to, through their own agency, to change what the institution looks like. But likewise, that institution has a responsibility to help develop the individual's agency. So that's the paradox right there, right? That you're talking about. So when you say, then you feel like maybe the best thing is to tell somebody what the thing is to do. That's an instance of when the institution's saying, okay, let me try to be that helpful presence, right? I just think that's such an important paradox to point out. But I think that there's hope. I feel like there's hope in that if we can keep in mind that both are operating, it's not just letting loose people into their own devices, right? We're always operating within and around institutions that we hopefully choose to associate with.
Totally. And I think I don't want to take up all your time. I know you have something that you wanted to share, Margaret, but it reminds, I think so much there are often such parallels between how we lead and support teachers in developing professionally and how we think of educating children. Not to belittle teachers at all, and but sometimes when we get kids at our school who have also been the participants in a very bureaucratic and hierarchical, highly structured and high stakes and overwhelming stimulus kind of learning environment, and they come into our holistic classroom spaces, there's the same sort of dynamic of like, you get to, no one gives you a grade now. How do you think you did, kid? Like, and that sometimes takes a lot of time and patience and cultivation and slow nurturing to develop the capacity to even for the kid to be able to think of it. And so similarly for teachers, I think it depends a lot on their life background, their professional background, how much practice. And I wonder, I guess I'll turn this into a question, then I'll be quiet, which is, do you ever have, like, are there teachers who you'll get participating in your program who maybe aren't optimally prepared to get the most out of it? Who are maybe, like, I'm just thinking it takes a certain level of maturity in one's professional presence to even be able to contemplate my best self in the teaching moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll be quiet.
Well, thank you. Yeah, you've opened up, like, we could spend 3 hours, right, on just
I know.
this question. I will say, number one, everybody who's participated in Teach for Your Best Self does so because they want to. And that does tend to filter out people that really aren't ready for it. It does require some introspection, quite a bit of personal reflection. And because the educators are coming from the current public school system, they're not what they crave is agency because they lack so much. They're not coming from places where, yeah, do whatever you want, it's your class. They're coming from places that they're really told to teach on rails a lot of times, and so they can, and in this culture, we're really not even. It's not even suggested as an idea that I have some agency around the self that I bring. If you say something that makes me angry, then I'm just going to be angry, right? If I say something, so it's not even introduced that there's this possibility that I don't have to react in the way that all of my programming is telling me that I should react in this moment. And that's where I think there's beautiful agency, because it's internal empowerment that starts to happen. And then from that, then I realized I can start relating to people differently in ways that are going to create different outcomes. Because if you and I get into a tussle where we're angry with each other, that's always going to lead to the same predictable place. And it's not going to be good. So we have choices in places that we didn't know we had choices before. And I think that's the kind of agency we're talking about here. And it reminds, it kind of makes me think of, as a writer, and as someone who spent a lot of years teaching writing, the difference between handing someone a blank piece of paper and also, scaffolding some prompts, some structure, some, like, hey, here's some ways to format this, and every student in my class is probably going to need a little different version of that. Like, how much structure do they need to feel comfortable enough where they have the agency, but they also feel safe inside of the structure, where it's not like too much that's overwhelming. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Paul.
I'm sorry, I'm going to say one last thing. It
Yeah,
reminds
please.
me a little, Csikszentmihalyi's work on flow. and the conditions that are necessary to get into that flow state.
Yes.
And it's a certain amount of proficiency and skill, as well as confidence, as well as autonomy. And, you know, there's a number of factors that have to come together to support that person to find that, I think, maybe. Anyway.
The flow state is the ultimate extension of best self.
Yeah.
If I'm in my best self, that state is accessible some of the time. Yeah.
So you draw on also humanistic psychology, Rogers and Maslow and all that, I would assume as well.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, and that, you know, in terms of Maslow, just even emphasizing spaces of belonging, spaces where I'm not only physically safe, I'm psychologically and emotionally safe. All of that stuff is required, like in the space, for our students to have a maximal chance of being in their best selves. And likewise, it's required for us as educators. So even like attending to those places is a part of what I mean when I say creating spaces that bring out the best in us. Margaret, I'll let you take over from
Jay,
here.
actually, I just wanted to add to that a little bit because I've had the privilege and the pleasure of being able to be both a sort of co-facilitator, conspirator with Jay throughout these 4 years, but also participate in the project repeatedly, right? So I've gone through different layers in my own self of going through this. And I think what you said, Jay, is just really, really important and something that we need to keep like thinking about. This idea of agency as at a very micro level, I didn't realize I had that option to respond this way in this situation, right? Because I've had that experience now in situations where I would have had a very different reaction to come away from it saying, oh, that felt really different. Now I have this option to respond that way. And I think that's what our teachers are saying to us over and over again. And even I'm looking at a couple of them who wrote in here, but we also have some other pieces where they've written about the experience of being confronted by an angry child or a resistant child and responding in a different way and saying, before I wouldn't have known I could do that. I didn't know I had that option to respond that way. And look what happened. And I think that's the kind of story that we've heard over and over again that speaks to what Jay's talking about in terms of agency being just at this inner level, not necessarily like I have to plan curriculum or develop things or structure big sort of institutional agency, but this kind of inner and relational agency that makes such a profound difference in people's sense of self.
Margaret, since we're do you want to like share your screen and then you click through the slides, or do you want me to pop it
Why don't
up?
you just keep sharing it? I only had two slides. One of them just has the article on it, and I don't know. Paul, thank you, and Andrea, thank you for this for publishing this article. I'm not going to talk all about it, but I did just want to say that the whole focus on agency here really was it's really an argument in a big, broad sense for professional learning that accommodates an idea that, you know, focuses on teacher well-being, not just student social emotional learning, but teachers' overall well-being, and that agency is a really important piece of that sense of well-being. It feeds that sense of well-being, and this is something that it's pretty hard to I think that we had submitted the article to another couple places and it did not get accepted for publication. And I think part of the reason is because it's notoriously difficult to make a really strong empirical connection between teachers' well-being and student outcomes the way they're traditionally assessed and measured, right? So student achievements and test scores and those sorts of things. There's a little bit of research out there that looks at the impact of teachers' well-being and sense of self on student outcomes, but that the connection there is very hard to make for lots of reasons. So, but I think that we have plenty of evidence from the cohort. Now we've got about 150 teachers who are part of this research, and looking now at ways to really make that connection stronger between a sense of agency and student outcomes, not just in the academic achievement sense, but in the broader sense of becoming best self students, right? So that's the big argument, is that overall, we think that professional learning for teachers really should consider and incorporate this social emotional dimension that we're bringing, in many cases, the teaching profession is bringing into the classroom for students without actually experiencing it themselves as teachers. So that's sort of the broad argument. Jay, if you want to look at the next slide, I guess I do want to share this with you because this is what's coming out of our current research. We're doing a longer scale sort of longitudinal look at how enduring is teachers' sense of well-being after participating in this institute, and what are the things that have driven or drive teacher well-being in the institute. And these are the four things that are repeatedly surfacing as being the powerful drivers of a sense of well-being. Community in the sense of a strong sense of connection that's developed through, and Robin, you were talking about experiences, but that connection that's developed through shared experiences and shared language, and people who can engage in authentic conversations with each other about what their experiences are really like. So that's the community piece. The belonging part is obviously related to community, but that's the idea that when we feel known and seen and heard, we're better able to learn and grow and thrive and teach, right? So that's the belonging piece, when we feel like we have that sense of belonging. Purpose is probably the most closely tied to agency. The sense of purpose is identifying the why that I have, that I can keep coming back to and that I can ground my decision making in. So that's a sense of purpose. And then applied practice is also really important, because you can have all those things, but teachers do appreciate, I think, having specific, Jay calls them, whether they're principles or strategies or approaches, but things that we can take back with us into whatever situation it is we're in and actually apply. So those are the four kind of drivers that we're looking at. We have plenty of data. It's just the challenge is figuring out how to sort of sort it all out. But we're excited for the next phase of this research project that really teases apart those four drivers a little bit further. That's really all I wanted to say about this, to add on to what Jay has had to say. I'd be happy to entertain questions and thoughts there too.
Can you tell a little bit more about how you did the data analysis? Because you can get themes and patterns from qualitative data in lots and lots of different ways.
Yeah, we have an extraordinary amount of qualitative data. Unfortunately, we didn't start the IRB process, the Institutional Review Board process, until this year. So we're working now retrospectively on getting IRB approval for some of the data that we've been collecting. It consists of, in the beginning, we were doing monthly surveys during those monthly institutes, plus annual pre and post surveys, qualitative and quantitative kinds of questions, but lots of reflection. We also offer the Teach from Your Best Self as a graduate class. So part of the graduate class, if people choose that option, is they write reflective pieces, which they submit. And so we have all of these narrative essays of talking about application and impact. So there's all of that data. Right now, what we're working on is longitudinal sort of all cohort surveys that are going out and specifically looking at the connection between aspects of well-being and Teach from Your Best Self. So trying to make that correlation really more solid. And that's the next phase of this project. Did that kind of answer, Robin, or were you looking for something else?
I can ask you more when I see you on Thursday.
Yeah, we can talk more. We can talk more. One of the cool things about the project is that Jay mentioned the leadership strand, so that teachers pick up projects that they're excited about. We have had teachers who are super interested in helping with the research. Right now, there's 6 teachers in that leadership group who are part of the research team, and we meet monthly, and they are helping develop all of the plans and the projects. They're full on board with all of the research methodology and data analysis and everything else. But like I said, right now, the one little glitch is is the IRB piece, and that's under review right now. Once that gets approved and everybody's, given implied consent retrospectively for all of that data, we'll be in a much better place. But it's exciting to have the teachers actually participating, because they're, of course, part of the project as well as the researchers on the project.
I love all the work you guys are doing, and my wheels are spinning in lots of different directions. And Jay, if you live in the area, I'd love to meet up with you for coffee or something and talk more.
Be my pleasure. The last slide has my contact, so feel free to reach out to me. I'm in Medford, so yes.
Andrea and Cam, are you both? You're both in Georgia. Are you teaching? Where are you teaching?
So we have a small holistic nature-based program, mostly for homeschool children. So it's part-time, 4 days a week for 4 hours each day, with a wide age range from 4 to 12-year-olds. And yeah, I think we have a decent amount of agency. And by that, I mean, we have an incredible amount of agency to really do whatever we want to do. And as we've been having this discussion, I think I've had 2 kind of threads that I keep weaving together in my mind. But one has been that I always love asking teachers, especially teachers who I admire or who I seem to just maybe be teaching from their best selves what their journey has been to get there. And so this conversation is just been a reflection of that in many ways of I see you doing it. So what was your journey? How did you come to this place of being this teacher that I see as being present and living what a lot of the values that I hold in education are, and what you described, Margaret, with the research and some of what's coming up for what's creating that well-being, and even just the idea of having a mentor, having a community, and so many of these things I think are really important. So that's one thread that I've been playing with, is that journey that teachers take, whatever it may be, to get to that place. And then I keep asking myself, what is my best self? What does that mean? What does the best self look like? What does it feel like? What does it look like in me? What does it look like in those around me? Um, and as I think, especially after Paul's question, I started to realize that when we're talking about the self, this higher sense of being, that when I step in front of students, I feel like this, especially if I'm being asked to bring my best self to students, it's almost like a lot of pressure. This is me. This is the self. I have to be the best I can be. And, when there's that freedom, especially when there's that high sense of agency, if I mess up and no one was telling me to do this, well, then I might burn my ego a little bit. So that sense of, okay, well, yes, I want to teach from my best self, but that's also terrifying, because what if I fail? And so also what we've been talking about around creating a community where that's okay, where you're not alone, where that doesn't mean that when you fail, it doesn't mean you failed. I know that's been that personally, I can relate to that. I know a lot of friends who are either leaders in school or teaching in school, and know that that's really challenging, that sometimes a lack of agency is certainly a problem, but sometimes that overextension of, like, it's a lot of pressure. So just kind of no answers necessarily, but just playing a lot with these questions of what that looks like. How can I come to a place of moving toward that? Because that definitely sounds good, but without burning myself down in the process.
Andrew, that's a beautiful articulation of what I think so many educators feel, because we want to do our best every single time. And then there's that automatic pressure, because there's a kind of an internal narrative that we have to live up to something. And for just about every educator that I've ever met, I ask them to raise their hands when we do one of these sessions. I ask, do you ever feel like no matter what you do, it's never going to be enough? All the hands up, right? So that's another like underlying story that's kind of driving things, and so we have agency about the stories we tell ourselves too. One of the modules or principles we bring to teach from your best self is radical acceptance, and that's radical acceptance for what the students bring in this moment. It means I accept them for who they are right now, so I can help them grow from there, as well as radical acceptance for my own limitations, my own weaknesses, my strengths, the possibility that lives in me, the potential, and for what the conditions are right now, because maybe I am really tired, and maybe I'm having a chronic fatigue crash, and maybe I have had an upsetting morning, and now I have 32 students in front of me. What is the best self that I can bring? Radically accepting what that is, given the limitations and the conditions that I'm dealing with. And I think we can sometimes put pressure on ourselves that sort of adds to the challenge of bringing our best self. I pointed to a lot of the external pressures, but then there's these internal ones. And radical acceptance is one way that we can start releasing at least that part of it, right? That the part where I could pressure myself. Because there's a humanity to this, right? I have finite time, energy, and attention. And I have to include that too. and realizing I want to have a good, fulfilled life when I'm not teaching. I don't want to come home burned out, exhausted, because I've thrown everything I could at these kids from all of my energy in order to serve them. And now I'm not great for my spouse or my kids, right? So there's this like holistic view. And I think some of it has to do with just accepting our limitations and then figuring out how can I maximize what I can do by spending as little as I can for the maximum results. And that's another thing we talk about in Teach from Your Best Self is maximum impact, minimum effort. So it's like a whole strategy around that. And that actually comes from the ninja in Shinton Kai, ninja's philosophy, because they're always working undercover and completely outnumbered and in the dark. They were looking for ways to maximize their impact on whatever their mission was with minimal effort. And it's a great philosophy to bring to education. I'm going to share this screen with our contact info. It's also got a flyer because we're running some new cohorts this summer and love to have you join us if you would like. It's open to anyone who works in education at all. There's my email. You've got LinkedIn. Also, there's a book. And if you want to find out more, probably the easiest and best way is to just pick up a copy of the book. Routledge published this. It came out in 2023. It's a gift of the pandemic because I was just going to do this teacher training experience. But then when the pandemic hit, oh my gosh, what happened to teacher trainings? So I pivoted to the book, and now the book exists, which is really fun.
That's great. Thank you guys so much. I also loved your question, Andrea, and yeah, it's another irony, isn't it? That like, yes, of course we want to bring our best self, and wow, that's a lot to ask of us. And I'm glad for what you said, Jay, because that's what I took. I don't remember if it was from the article. I also visited your guys' website, but the idea that like your best self is relative given the particular circumstances right now in this context today, with other goals you have too, besides delivering the slickest lesson. Like there's other things that I'm reminded of. Like, did you, Robin, in particular, ever know Lynn Stoddard, who wrote Educating for Human Greatness?
I can't remember if I think it's a him, not a her, yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
When I worked with the National Coalition of Alternative Community Schools, I definitely reviewed one of his books.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember, there was also this fellow who was the head of lab schools around the US, and I met him a couple of times. I don't think that was Lynn, but I met them both at the same time, so I don't remember.
When I met Lynn Stoddard, he was an older man. I can't imagine he's still with us, but his book was called Educating for Human Greatness. And I talked with him about, wow, that's a lot of pressure, isn't it? Like human greatness, like my greatness, my students' greatness, the world, like, I don't know. And anyway, I was just reminded of that. And
Yeah.
yeah.
It was published by Charlie and Ron, that book.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
I remember the book.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
Jay. Thank you, Margaret.
Such a pleasure. Thank you for all your great questions. That really has made this such a great, fun experience. So thank you for your thinking, your reflection, and for the opportunity to talk about something that I just love to talk about. So it's a pleasure.
I don't want to take up too much time because I just was driving and listening so hard. And thank you so much for your wonderful talk. It reminds me of the work that we're doing. William and I were working on the beginning teachers research. So it's very, very similar place, how we kind of grew from there. So we were listening to all the stories and agonies of the beginning teachers, new teachers, and then they feel very, very isolated in their settings. They do have the mentor teachers coming from the schools assigned to them. So that was not as helpful because they did not have the personal relationship. They were feeling constantly being judged and evaluated upon rather than being mentored and coached and understood. So when we met once a month for several years with Ronnie and William and the teachers, that was the home coming back. So they wanted to, I mean, they were sharing just so much of how they feel so comfortable and safe, a safe place to talk about the things that they would not be able to talk with their mentors or others in their schools. So this was related to the research that we're doing, the co-reflection. So when Andrea asked the question about the best self, what does it look like? And today's my best self is this, but tomorrow and also when I meet challenging situations and the crisis is happening in front of my eyes, how can I maintain and sustain my flow even being my best self and bringing my core qualities, my best the qualities in me to really activate and utilize in those situations. So yeah, I just want to talk to you more and listen to more. So there's some correlation that I see that we could maybe open up more dialogues to develop further. So yeah, I will stop there.
Big yes for that. Thank you. And I hope you all take down my email, reach out, let's meet, whether virtually or in person. It would be such a pleasure. I know we've been speaking, but I know I can learn a lot from all of you.
Thank you so much for what you do to our MAT students. That's just the best of the best that they can get. So we appreciate you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea, for getting it organized. We appreciate your invitation.
Thank you. Thanks for Young He recommending you.
Keep us on your list, okay?
Come
Yes,
to some of
absolutely.
our other sessions. We
Yeah,
have lots
I'd
of
love
good
to be
discussions
notified
every
when
other
you have
week.
them.
Okay. I'm just learning about this, so I didn't even know you had these. So if there's like a mailing list of when they're at, just let me know so I can get them on my schedule.
Put him
Yeah.
on the mailing list. Yeah.
I have, yeah, you should be on the list now for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, we
Thank you.
usually have anywhere from 6 to 10 people who participate every 2 weeks. It's
Okay.
one of
Nice.
my favorite gatherings.
Wonderful. Yeah, this has felt really nice, and so I look forward to coming back and learning from others.